Thanks for joining me for this episode of Get Me Ready to Sell. I know it's been a while, but there's some news in the real estate world that happened last Friday, March the 15th, and you might have even seen some headlines for it this weekend. Today, I want to unpack that for you, what that looks like for you when you're getting ready to sell your house. So let's dive in and start unpacking what we've learned about the settlement that the NAR, National Association of Realtors, did with the Department of Justice and some lawsuits. So let's get into this.
Are you feeling uncertain about selling your home? Do you wonder what needs to be done to get it sold, what you could sell it for, and how to get an acceptable offer? If that's the case, then Get Me Ready to Sell is the podcast just for you. Your host, Jeff Jones, is a realtor, coach, and entrepreneur, and he can help you gain the confidence you deserve to successfully sell your home. Here's Jeff.
All right, let me tell you right off the bat, anything you hear from me on this podcast or you're watching it on YouTube, it's my opinion, my interpretation from what's going on. I'm not speaking for my brokerage. I'm not speaking for any other organization out there, any of the MLSs that I'm a part of, multi-listing services, any of those things, not speaking for the NAR. This is just me and my interpretation from what came down from this ruling. You may or may not know that the NAR has been involved in multiple lawsuits, and many of the larger brokerages have been involved in multiple lawsuits for the last several years about compensation, particularly as it stands to sellers and sellers overpaying for the compensation for their listing agent. That's what's been driving this whole thing. Now, what this verdict was, or the agreement that they reached in the settlement, because the NAR and the brokerages lost those suits lost the big suit several months ago, and a bunch of copycat lawsuits have come up from them, class action lawsuits, and they stem from the fact that when you go to sell your home, when an owner begins the process of selling their home and they're partnering with a professional real estate agent to list that home for them to get it sold, there's a professional services fee, a commission that's paid. And rightly so, because that professional real estate agent, and I'm one of those, we are performing a service. We have the tools, the training, the knowledge, the experience to help sellers navigate this process of getting their home sold. We also work with buyers to help them buy the home that they want. So we're involved in that process. Anyway, as we navigate through all that, we get paid for the service that we provide, for the efforts, the navigating the contracts, all those things, and it comes down to a commission. Since the late 90s, I believe since 1996, buyer agency has been a part of our industry. Before that, if a buyer, somebody looking for a home, wanted to see a home, they would call the agent whose name was on the sign, and people still do that today. They would call that agent and they would say, "Hey, I'm interested in looking at 123 Main Street. I see you have it listed. Is it possible for me to take a look at it?" That agent would arrange to show you that property. Many times I was one of those buyers, and it would be that agent who would show me that property. And that agent was an agent of the seller. They didn't represent me, didn't represent my best interest. From what I understand, I wasn't in the real estate industry back then. The Department of Justice came along and said, "Hey, we think it would be great for buyers to have better representation." So that an agent was working on behalf of the buyer for their loyalty, obedience to them, and in that buyer's best interest, just like the listing agents were doing for the sellers. So buyer agency came into existence. How were those buyer's agents going to get paid? The NAR, the MLSs, all the people who were in a position to help make that decision at that time chose that the buyer's agents would be paid from basically the listing agent sharing their commission with the buyer's agent. And we call that clear cooperation. It's cooperative compensation. So let's say that you were going to list your home And we hear this a whole lot of a certain number of the commission. You might have a number in your mind about what that commission might be for the listing. You've seen some headlines that probably said, hey, the 6% commission is gone because of this settlement. A recent podcast I heard from some NAR leadership is that the typical national average on the commission has been 5% for the last few years. Anyway, that's beyond the point. But what would happen is the seller and the listing agent would agree on a commission, whatever that would be, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, whatever that percent is. They would agree on a percentage that would be the professional services fee that the listing brokerage would get when they successfully helped that homeowner close on selling their property. In that listing agreement, the brokerage, the listing broker would have, there's a line in the contracts that I've seen anyway, that shows how much they would cooperate with that buyer's agent if they brought a buyer. And so let's just say it's half of that percent, and you have a listing agreement with a listing brokerage for, let's say, 6%, and they would cooperate with a buyer's agent for 3%, meaning if that seller sold their home for $300,000, that the listing brokerage would get 3% or $9,000, and the selling brokerage would get 3% or $9,000. That's $18,000 in professional services fees that the seller would pay when they close their home. Now, whether that's a lot of money or not a lot of money, that's entirely between you as a seller and your listing brokerage. Would they want to work for less? Maybe. Do they offer more services? Maybe. Who knows? But it's a negotiable part of the process. All of this is negotiable. Well, what happened is that seller said, I don't want to pay that buyer's agent that X percent. I want to keep that $9,000 for me. You earned it. You've been paying on the house for several years. You've done the upgrades, whatever it is. That's how the industry is operated. Because if that buyer is looking to buy a property, that $300,000 house, and they're going to have to pay 3.5% down, then they needed to have saved $10,500 for a down payment. That's cash, $10,500 in cash. Their closing costs, you've heard me talk about this on other episodes, their closing costs are going to consist of a loan origination fee. They're going to have the attorney's fees that they're going to be closing with. They're going to be prepaying typically several months or a year's worth of the rest of the years of insurance, of taxes, or a certain amount, maybe the full year of homeowners insurance plus a few months, a few days or like 45 or 60 days worth of interest on the property because their payments won't kick in. Anyway, they're going to have a lot of fees rolled up into closing costs and prepaid items. That could be anywhere from 3 to 5%. So let's just say it's 3%. Well, that's another $9,000. So now that buyer has to have $10,500 and $9,000. So $19,500. Let's just say $20,000 because they're going to be paying for a home inspection, a home appraisal. It's probably going to be outside of those. So $21,000 they're going to need to have saved up. Now, if they're also paying their buyer's agent that a 3% or whatever, let's just say it's 3%, that's $9,000. So they're looking at about $30,000 that they either need to have saved up, or they're going to ask you to make some concessions for closing costs and repairs, whatever. Or they're going to be getting some type of a loan that has down payment assistance or maybe a gift from a family member. All those are options that they have to come up with a way to put that $30,000 together. So the industry, since the late 90s, has put that on the seller, and it's not always been presented in a way that that's a negotiable amount for you. It could be $1, a set amount, a different percentage, whatever it is. I see those cooperating compensation amounts of anywhere from 1% to 2.5%, 3%, whatever. Maybe sometimes there's a bonus in there. They want to get a house sold, so they'll offer the agent even more if they bring a buyer for that. Regardless of all that, that's how the industry's operated. Well, the lawsuit came back and NAR said, okay, we'll make some changes to how we do this. We're going to say that we're no longer going to make the cooperating compensation a part of the multi-listing service. Hey, thanks for listening so far. I just want to make sure that you know about ReadyToSellScore.com. On that website, you'll choose some statements that best describe how ready you are to sell your home. Then you'll get a customized list of items of things that you need to do to actually get ready to sell your home. I look forward to being able to help you any way I can. Now, back to the show. When I look up a for sale property in our MLS, it shows me on there how much the listing agent is providing compensation for a buyer's agent. That might be the enough to cover the agreement I have with my buyer. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less, who knows, but that's in there. And that's been able for us to be able to be seen. A ruling that came out a year or so ago is that had to be shared with the public. Typically, if you looked up on Zillow, Realtor.com, or your agent sent you listing information, you're not going to see that amount of money. Well, they said, let's make that clear. We want everybody to see what's being offered to the buyer's agent. So the buyers get to see that. And some agents would choose to not show somebody property if that amount didn't cover the agreement they have with their buyer. Well, that's not right either, because our code of ethics as a realtor says our loyalty is to the client, not to ourselves. So if a house fit a client's desires, regardless of what the compensation was, we needed to show that to them. I always did that. I didn't filter out homes based on what the offer of compensation was. It was, did it fit what my buyer, my client told me that they want? That's what I would look for. Anyway, so this ruling has come out and says we're no longer going to be putting that in the MLS. It's no longer part of that process. It's not going to be what's publicly available out there. Now, anything I tell you about how the ruling came down and what the settlement was, this all still has to be ratified by a judge. The Department of Justice can still weigh in and make some adjustments to this. So there's going to be some fine tuning. And the NAR expects to have all of these rules and new changes in place by mid-July of 2024. Many brokerages are beginning to operate this way now. So prior to March the 15th, a listing agent would have a conversation with a seller that was prepared to sell their home, and they would be talking about compensation, and they may not clearly explain what that compensation looks like when it comes to a buyer's agent. Now we're after March the 15th, and it's a whole new conversation. That amount's not even going to be in the MLS anymore. It's going to get to the point to where it's not even there. You don't see it. So what's going to happen when a buyer wants to see a property, and the buyer's agent is going to figure out a way from the buyer how they're going to get paid for their services? So what will happen is a buyer wants to see a property. A buyer has a buyer's agent and want to go see a property. That buyer's agent is going to have a conversation with the listing agent, probably at the point of making an offer, is there any amount of compensation that is offered to the buyer's agent? It's going to be a private conversation that they're going to have. So it's going to be, you're going to have a conversation with your agent's going to have a conversation with the buyer's agents to tell them what you as the seller have decided that you're going to offer in cooperation. Now, a buyer's agent, one of the new rules that came out is a buyer's agent is no longer going to be able to show property to a potential buyer without having a buyer's agency agreement. Some states require a buyer's agency agreement, other states don't. But the NAR is saying that if any of their members want to show property, there has to be a buyer's agency agreement in place. That's going to have an impact on you as a seller getting your home sold. Well, let's talk through a couple of scenarios. Scenario, and I had one of those recently, I typically don't show property without a buyer's agency agreement. I try to always use those, and I'm going to say it's not been 100% of the time, but it will be that way moving forward. And I like that because it puts us all on equal footing. If a buyer calls me and says, hey, I've been, getting your emails for a while, or I ran across this Facebook post, I would like to talk to you about showing me a property. I would try to meet with them ahead of time, have a Zoom call, whatever, to get a buyer's agency agreement signed. They didn't always want to do that. And I would kind of decide on, is this somebody who I might want to be involved with, or do I think I can really help them? Are they serious about this? I would just try to navigate that. And I never liked doing that. But also what would happen is if I said, I would like to show you that property, but we need to get a buyer's agency agreement in place first, that puts me to work for you as your agent helping you buy property. Get some resistance and pushback on that, but they could call 5 or 6 other agents. And if I wouldn't be one to show it to them, another agent would. I potentially would lose that. And I would let that be what helped me make that decision. But if you've got your house for sale, an agent or a buyer calls the number on the sign to show them the property, then your listing agent has to have a conversation with you about, can they also represent that client if they want to buy the property? Some states allow dual agency, others don't. Then maybe the agent becomes a facilitator, doesn't really represent you, doesn't represent the buyer. But they have to have a conversation. And before anyone can unlock your door and show it to a buyer, they have to have gone through the process of having a buyer's agency agreement in place. It puts everybody on equal footing. There are going to be some buyers who don't care for that. It's going to possibly change how open houses happen. How do we do open houses now? Because a buyer comes in to want to look at your property as your listing agent, and I'm hosting an open house. I don't represent them. Can I let them come in? We don't know what that looks like. You just need to know that the ramifications from the settlement have an effect for you as a seller, and they also have an impact on the buyers. So what's going to happen is any buyer that wants to look at a property is going to have a buyer's agency agreement in place with a buyer's agent. It's going to impact the potential, because let's talk through this scenario that I have a buyer that wants to buy a house, and I have a conversation with them about how I'm going to get paid, what my services would cost if they want to hire me to help them buy that house. And we have an agreement in place that says I'm going to get paid X flat amount dollars, X percentage of the sales price, whatever that may be. My buyer might say, well, I'm going to need to find a seller who I can negotiate with to be able to get that paid. If the house, they're going to offer $300,000 for the house, and let's just say that my fee is $5,000. Are they going to ask the seller to pay that $5,000? Are they going to offer $305,000 and have the seller pay it so it's part of it? We're going to have to navigate what this looks like. The point in all this is you have to have a conversation with your listing agent. If you happen to be buying a property, then you're your buyer's agent. You have to have that conversation. But no longer you're going to be putting in the MLS that you're willing to pay the buyer's agent an X percent. That may be good for you. It may not be. What we think could happen is that there could be some buyers who would say, well, they're not offering any cooperation or any compensation. Or when the buyer's agent asks your listing agent, are they offering any compensation? And the answer is no. Then that buyer could say, well, I don't want to go look at that property because I don't have any way of paying you, my agent, if they're not willing to do that. The conversation to have with your listing agent, because that could impact your ability to get eyes on your home and receive offers if you're selling your home. Again, we don't know what all this is going to look like. We just know that you're going to have to navigate what this does look like if you're selling a home. I've talked to my seller clients about considering that buyer's agent fee that they pay as part of the marketing to get their home sold. It's what helps bring buyers in, because their buyer's agents are going to get paid at the closing from the proceeds that the buyer is giving you, the seller. You don't get to keep all that money. It's going to go to their agent. And you need to, as a seller, consider that as a marketing fee to attract buyers to come in. just like pictures, just like any upgrades or any repairs that you made to the property. Um, we don't know what all this is going to look like. It's probably going to be a little bit different, but the point in all this is to know that everybody, or at least reputable agents, want everybody to win. We want home ownership to be as easy of a process as possible for buyers. We know that statistics tell us, research tells us that buyers make better citizens because they have ownership in the community. They build more wealth because of the equity and appreciation of the properties that they buy typically. And it's just better for society to be a homeowner as opposed to not being a homeowner. We want them to be homeowners. We also want to take care of our seller clients, for you, to make sure that you're getting out of this process what you are looking to get out of this process. When we're listing your home, we want to help you get that home prepared for how it can be shown for the next buyer that comes in. We also want to help you price that home properly. Then we're going to promote that home for you. And part of that promoting is how we're cooperating with a buyer's agent. And that's not going to be an easy thing to see moving forward. We're going to have to work harder on that. And you're going to have to make some decisions as a seller, as opposed to, are you willing to pay any of that? Are you willing to pay extra concessions that could be used for closing costs, maybe could be used for buyer's agents fees that could come in? There's all kinds of things that come into that. If you're wanting to sell your home to a veteran and a buyer comes in and they have a VA loan, a Veterans Administration loan, the rules as of today do not allow a veteran to pay their buyer's agency fees, to the professional services fee for their buyer's agent. Well, if the MLS isn't allowed to put that information in there, then how do the agents representing veterans that are buying with a VA loan, how do they know what they're going to get paid? How do they get paid? The whole industry has to navigate all of that to figure this stuff out moving forward. It's going to have an impact, going to have a ripple effect. And I guess the bottom line is be patient, know where those dollars are going. And if you're selling your house, let's say for $300,000, you're going to have fees that go to your listing brokerage. You're probably going to have fees that go to getting your home prepared to sell. Your listing agent typically is going to be paying for the professional photography that comes in, any video, any marketing that they do. That's not an expense that's put back on you unless you have an agreement that way. But it's a new day for us. Hopefully, it's going to create a lot more transparency. It's going to put agents more on equal footing, that all of the agents are expected to behave in a certain way. If you're not aware, we do have a code of ethics. I've talked about what is a realtor in another episode that you can go back and listen to, where we explain to you what a realtor really is and what we do and what we bring to the table. So hopefully this answers some questions. Maybe you didn't even have any. You're not, what lawsuit? I don't keep up with the news. But it's out there. A lot of different headlines that are out there. They try not to make the real estate industry look good. Just with any industry, there's some great people in it, and there's some folks that probably shouldn't be in it. But that's with any industry out there. There are drivers on the roads who are great drivers, and there are drivers on the roads who don't have any business being behind the wheel of a car. Again, in any industry, you have that. This is going to help create, I believe, a little bit more level footing, a little bit more transparency, more conversations. And buyers are going to have to get used to having a conversation with their buyer's agent ahead of time. If you decide that you're going to sell a home, you can expect a listing appointment, depending on how many appointments, but you can expect between an hour and 2+ hours of conversations with your listing agent. Some listing agents have teams, and you might talk to one team member the team lead for 20, 30 minutes about their process on marketing and stuff. They might have another agent come in and get with you on facts of the house, the different details that need to happen and go into the listing. Or you might have that. I'm a one person team right now. So when I go have a listing appointment, I'm typically in that home for 2 hours. Buyers don't typically operate that way. It's, hey, there's a property I want to see. Can you show it to me? Yes. Would you like to see it in 30 minutes? Yes. Okay, let me make sure we can go see it in 30 minutes. We meet, show up at the house, we look at the property. What we're seeing through this settlement is that those days are gone. It's going to be, okay, Mr. Buyer, I know you want to go see that property, but we're going to have a conversation to explain what this whole process looks like. So that could be 30 minutes, hour and a half, navigating what it looks like for that buyer's agent to represent the buyer and how that buyer's agent is going to be paid for their professional services. It's not clear cut anymore. It's going to be more in the negotiation on the offer of the purchase of the property, who's paying what, all those things going in there. I guess the bottom line today is, in the midst of this settlement, it is more imperative that you partner with a professional real estate agent to help you navigate what this looks like as a seller, what you're going to be expected to pay to that listing brokerage, and what you may be prepared to pay for a buyer's broker in part of the negotiations. Thanks for listening to this episode of Get Me Ready to Sell. I hope this has been helpful. And as always, my role is to help you be confident every step of the way. And if you're watching on YouTube, I hope that you'll take time to like this episode, to subscribe to this episode, this podcast, and to share it with others that you know may be looking to sell their home. Or there is an episode. This episode's also going to be shown on Get Me Ready to Buy. If you know somebody who's looking to buy, or you are, you can find that episode and share that with somebody as well. If you do want to sell your home and you're in the Mid-South, Memphis metro area, and you don't have a listing agent, I'd love to have a conversation with you. If you're somewhere else in the country and you don't have one, I have a network of agents throughout the United States that I can help you find a listing agent who you can trust to help you navigate the process of getting your home sold. You can see on the page here or in the notes all kinds of ways that you can get in touch with me to help you as you navigate selling your home. Have a blessed day.